Welcome to today's joint webinar, Accelerate Delivery of High-Quality Software, How Test Automation Can Help Drive Business Agility. On the behalf of Parasoft and CollabNet VersionOne, thank you all for joining us. We hope in the next hour you will learn very valuable information to apply in your organization. Before, let's go over a little housekeeping here, webinar. This webinar will be approximately 60 minutes. We will send out an email following the webinar with the recording and the slides, and we also will send out the PDU credit information as well. Also, please submit questions for the panelists via the Q&A widget found in the lower corner of your indicator there. So I am your host, Eric Robertson, VP of Product Marketing Management at CollabNet VersionOne. I've been with the company for close to 5 years and have a background in software and product engineering and held product management services and operational engineering roles for startups and large enterprises. I am certified SBC consultant, and I have delivered solutions and services for a number of customer engagements. I am honored to be joined by my colleague and friend, Mark Lambert, VP of Products from Parasoft, who will be the primary presenter for this session. Mark, welcome, my friend, and I know you're very excited to get started with this topic.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Eric, and thank you for that introduction. Yes, so my name is Mark Lambert. I'm the VP of Products at Parasoft. I've been working in this industry space for the last 15 years, specifically focused on software quality practices with Parasoft. And prior to that, I was actually working in data visualization and had research in electronic design automation as well as part of my research projects in the University of Manchester. So yeah, very excited to talk about this topic. It's been a passion for me for the last 15 years, as I said, so excited to share kind of thoughts and direction for everybody and hope that this is going to be really useful and valuable.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Mark. So quick overview of both companies before we begin. Now, some of you may know us as VersionOne, where we helped pioneer the Agile management tooling back in 2002. In August 2017, VersionOne merged with CollabNet, supporting both companies' shared vision that Agile and DevOps are interconnected and governed practices. And our mission is to enable enterprises to plan, build, and deliver high-quality software at speed. And we do that very well along with our partner, Parasoft here. In fact, this mission was realized even further with TPG, a leading PE firm acquiring a majority stake in CollabNet VersionOne. And recently, we just merged with Zebia Labs, a leader in DevOps tool chain and intelligence, bringing that all together under the umbrella of enterprise value stream management. Mark?
Yes, thank you, Eric. Yes, Parasoft, we're very proud to be partnered with CollabNet VersionOne. And we'll be talking today about our integrations with both VersionOne and the TeamForge products. Parasoft itself, we've been in the industry a little over 30 years, based out of Los Angeles, California, but with development teams spread across the U.S. as well as in Poland, Krakow, Poland, and our regional offices across Europe, distributors across the globe. One of the things that differentiates Parasoft in the test automation or continuous quality space is that we do everything from code analysis and unit testing all the way through to UI testing. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today. We'll kind of introduce you to each of those pieces that we have in the technology stack. We have actually built all of this ourselves ground up. And we are recognized in the industry as being a leader, both by Forrester and by Gartner, and specifically with their Customer Choice Awards from 2019 that really recognize Parasoft as one of the leading and most popular test automation suites in the market space. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the technology that we provide. We'll also talk about how we integrate in with open source practices and how we can tie all of that together in the value stream through the use of VersionOne and TeamForge. So, Eric, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. So really what we're talking about here is the drive to achieve the business agility. And really what we're seeing in the industry is that ability to adapt, to change, to learn and pivot and deliver that speed to be able to thrive in a competitive market. And as I say here, gone are the days where the big eat small. Today it's the fast eating the slow. It's all about the ability to learn and deliver faster than competitors and make sure we have that sustainable competitive advantage that is needed there.
Yeah, and it's worthwhile to talk about, and it's about the competitive advantage, but we really need to think about why that competitive advantage is important, what's driving that. The key thing that we see universally across our clients is all about how I can provide a really valuable customer experience to my end users and do it in the most competitive way possible. So, we talk about how there is disruption in almost every market today, with rapidly changing competitive landscape. Often when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about what Uber and Lyft have done to the taxi industry, right? So, remember the last time you got into a taxi, you might not even remember what the last time it is, but that experience is very, very different than what you get with an Uber or Lyft. With Uber or Lyft, I see where the car is, I can see what the car is, and then when I get into the vehicle, it's usually a lot cleaner than a taxi is. But that same disruption is happening to the more traditional markets as well. Take Tesla. What Tesla has done to the automotive industry has introduced massive disruption. And now the traditional vendors in the space, the established brands, are on their back heels. Tesla Model 3 is the #1 selling car in Europe. This is a really big concern for the German automotive market as a whole, but also the complete supply chain. It's all changing. So this disruption is happening in every industry. And what's driving that disruption is the constant demands for new capabilities. So take Tesla again as an example. Tesla, with the introduction of their autopilot, with the introduction of the true customer experience now. As you sit in the car, it's an experience. You have the big touchscreen in the middle. You have all of the bright colors if you go for the kind of the appropriate packages. It's a real experience, and it's an ownership experience that goes beyond just buying a car to go from A to B. And what we know is that the leaders in the industry are succeeding because they're able to deliver that innovation quickly. Again, I'll use Tesla as the example. The ability for Tesla to deliver software updates over the wire to their 12-inch tablet that's in the middle of the car and be able to deliver new capabilities to their customers constantly is giving them a high level of engagement with their end users and helping them really disrupt the market. Now, this is also happening in the more traditionally disrupted markets at an accelerated pace as well. So, for example, in the financial markets, especially in Europe, we have the Open Banking Initiative, or PSD2, which is driving to break up the monopolies that the traditional financial institutions have within the European financial markets, especially within retail banking. What this is driving towards is the ability for clients to not only demand the new functionality, but also the costs for the clients to switch from bank to bank is significantly reduced. So here I'll use another personal example where, looking at moving funds from one bank account to another because my existing bank was not giving me any interest on my savings account. That act of doing the transfer from one bank account to the other can either be seamless, as it was with Discover Bank, or it could be very painful, as it was with one of the top 5 other banks in the industry, where, in essence, they go through a series of steps on the mobile phone and then say, oh, okay, now you have to wait for an ATM card and a PIN code to appear at your house before we can complete the transaction. The ability for Discover to give the seamless process of going through everything in a fully automated manner, where me as an end user, my experience is within my mobile phone, which is where I spend most of my time. I have a seamless experience and transition between my mobile phone and my desktop web, which is where I'm doing the majority of my hard kind of use case banking. The ability for somebody to deliver a seamless experience between those two devices and be able to deliver innovation quickly is what's providing the disruption. But then the ability for me to be able to switch when I'm not happy is what's meaning that creating a customer experience that is reliable and is valuable is essential. Now, how we validate that customer experience is delivering what we need is we're just talking about testing. And that's kind of not the most exciting part of software development. Certainly, if you would have told me 30 years ago when I was graduating college that I was going to spend my time in testing, I would have pretty much laughed. But it is the thing which is the glue that makes sure that you have a valuable customer experience and a valuable, reliable capability to deliver to the customer. And it's not just that test that something works, it's testing that it works and continues to work. So here what you need is infrastructure. Infrastructure that can put in place and ensure that what I'm delivering to my customers is streamlined and of high quality. But what's coming down that infrastructure is not a slow-moving, predictable piece of machinery. It's actually a high-speed delivery process. You're trying to beat the competition to market, and you're trying to do it in a reliable way. If that test infrastructure and if the process that sits behind that test infrastructure is not well designed and is not maintainable, then what's going to happen is you're going to find that your delivery is going to come off the rails, and you're going to be overtaken by the competition, because the goal here is to get it to the market, get it to the customers as quickly as possible, but get it in a way that the customers see ongoing value. Now, obviously, Agile and DevOps is the answer to this. It's how we can deliver this functionality to market. But the challenge that we see many organizations face is that they have, it's not just one team that's delivering one piece of functionality, it's multiple teams, it's the entire organization. So this is where they have to look at putting processes and practices in place that help them scale their Agile testing practice or their Agile development practice. So Eric, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we can scale the delivery of Agile.
Yes, thanks, Mark. So when talking about scaling Agile and DevOps, it goes back to your point of it starts and ends with the customer, right? And why is that? So if we look at typically when we talk about scaling, we're talking about it from a top-down strategic type of approach. But in actuality, the Agile development and Agile adoption really was a bottom-up type of approach. It was really driven by the teams from that level. And it was really about achieving the better flow of work in that pipeline, right? So it was all about visualizing and limiting the work in process, your WIP, reducing the batch sizes of your work items, managing your queue length, things of that nature. And so really, if I look at this from the managing the work item or work item management from the stories and defect from the development, and then like Mark stated, I start now forming these different teams, and each one of these teams are efficiently focused on delivering, getting work out the done or the outputs, really focusing on that outputs, being able to show and deliver value much quicker and iterations, right? And what happened is that these teams really need to start being coordinated across the other is one. The second one is how do I align to the portfolio or more the business side of the house? So I have an understanding of and mapping to what I plan and deliver. How does that connect it back to my business outcomes or my business objectives from that standpoint? So in actuality, what happened is that the Agile development was very focused around the work items. Sometimes when I started going up this ladder that you see here, I'm able to start mapping up to my features, start mapping to my epics. But really, we saw a disconnect between the strategy and the portfolio level because a lot of the portfolio tools were project-centric, project portfolio tools, which were really primed or optimized for traditional type of development, not really Agile type of development. So it was the disconnect upstream between the strategy portfolio and what I was being able to actually plan and deliver. And thus, I had this challenge of scaling across the teams. On the other side of the house, we had these separate DevOps or CI/CD type of functions that were happening, usually separate as well. by different type of teams. And so mapping delivery to features was a challenge, especially when I started, I needed to have an insight around quality and security across my delivery pipeline. Because it was very disconnected, it was making work visible very difficult across this delivery pipeline. And so what we're starting to see is that this notion of being able to track the value across these different work streams, i.e. value streams, by being able to connect these together and being able to make this work visible and be able to measure and grow that. So the disconnect that happened is really what I delivered from a deployment or even from a release standpoint, it was not connected to the business objectives. I wasn't able to measure, learn, and growth. So it was a measure, learn, and growth type of challenge. And what that also primed is that it was this disconnected type of tool change because the needs of the Agile teams differ from a management, relate to a variety of different tools, and I had a disconnected tool chain. So it was very difficult for me, for organizations, to align that value to delivery. And like we stated, scaling Agile and DevOps starts in with the customer. So if I don't really have an understanding of being able to map what the customer needs are, and I'll be able to measure that to understand that the customer, I'm delivering an optimal customer experience, and how do I improve upon that? Without that, it's a huge disconnect there, because if I'm not connecting to my customer, then why is it I'm in business? So that means that all these teams together, everyone is essential. Technical and non-technical in leadership roles come together, processing tools are leveraged to optimize to what is referred to as an end-to-end value stream, where you can understand your workflow bottlenecks and build quality and security into your delivery pipeline. And as Mark mentioned, there's different type of methodologies of scaling frameworks out there. Say 5.0 is the latest version of that. Both of them, essentially, what they emphasize is this concept of value streams and mapping that to your continuous delivery, your continuous planning and delivery pipeline. And so that becomes very essential. So if you look at the Agile scaling frameworks, they have that value stream concept when referring to that end-to-end digital product delivery lifecycle and the importance of aligning business goals and objectives with that delivery pipeline. So if we zoom in a little bit further on the scaling Agile framework here, what we see here is an example of a continuous delivery pipeline map, or continuous delivery pipeline radar. And with that radar, collecting the data, they're able to measure that. So this model shows the flow of value through 4 dimensions: continuous exploration, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and release on demand. And this continuous delivery pipeline enables organizations to map their current pipeline into a new structure and then use continuous improvement to continue to deliver value to these customers. And so next, Mark will talk about and discuss how we use the CI and the CD portion of this model of these dimensions as part of the continuous flow of value. The critical importance of building security and quality into your pipeline to make sure the deployed solutions behave as expected in production before they're released to your end users or your customers. Again, delivering a scalable, optimal customer experience through test automation and intelligence. Mark?
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so once we've got a scaled Agile practice in place, there are these key sectors in the radar which are orientated around testing and test automation. So if I look at that radar, I can actually break it down a little further, and we're going to use this breakdown as we start talking through the different techniques that we can apply to put the appropriate automation in place. So the first is we're going to start looking at what we can do during the development and build stages. Here's code analysis and test automation. Typically, as I'm doing the development, we're going to talk a little bit about TDD very briefly today. But often what I'm looking at here when I'm talking about testing as part of the development and build, I'm talking about unit testing during the earlier stage of the development process. We can then move further on and talk about test automation, which in today's conversation, we're going to focus on higher level testing. We're going to talk about testing at the API level. We're going to talk about testing at the UI level. And then we're also, once you've got your functional test automation in place, this is when you're going to want to start looking at the non-functional business requirements. The two primary non-functional business requirements that many people focus on are both performance and security. We're going to talk about security a little bit during the earlier stage through code analysis and how we can actually shift security requirements earlier into the software development process. But also security in the form of penetration testing, which is more network level or outside in a focused approach to security, will fall under the non-functional testing. And all of this is done in my pre-stage or pre-production environment. We can then take those same end-to-end scenarios and apply them in our stage and our deployment environment. So typically what you're going to want to do is to identify as many things as early as possible in the process, but then do ongoing validation inside of your pre-production and production environment. Notice here that I talk about, in the title, I'm talking about accelerating delivery with continuous quality. There is a term in the industry that a lot of people are using, certainly we at Parasoft talk about it, which is the term of continuous testing. But really what you want to do is you want to build quality into your process, not just test, because what testing does is test tells you if you've got a problem. It doesn't help you prevent that problem from appearing. So we're going to talk about how we can not only shift left the testing, but also put preventative processes in place so that our quality is improved and how we can get a feedback loop. So if we take those same stages, and now let's kind of think about how we lay through the different techniques and what our process is as we go through that pipeline. Obviously, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define our work items. We're going to define our user stories. We're going to be also capturing defects and issues from the field, and we're going to be in essence triaging our backlog and defining what those things that we need to work on are. And the workflow today will give a short demonstration of our integration with VersionOne. That same integration is available for TeamForge as well. So really, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. We can support the same workflow that we're talking about today with either of those two environments. So as I move on to my first stage in the process, I'm going to start looking at doing code analysis at the same time as developing the code. Code analysis is actually really one of the most valuable software quality practices that many people overlook. Many people look at code analysis and say, okay, this is naming conventions and code beautification. And there are a lot of open source technologies out there that can help you with that and provide those kind of initial kind of baseline code analysis capabilities. But the real value of code analysis is more around how to identify real problems in the code at the earliest point possible. So here, this is where you start looking towards industry best practices, either around security or reliability, to help uncover the hidden problems within the code base. From a security perspective, there are standards such as CWE and OWASP, which probably many folks are familiar with. These are typically very focused on identifying weaknesses within applications and things that you need to protect yourself against. But then there is also an additional standard called CERT, which is very popular within C and C++ development teams who are focused on embedded devices. And this is more of an engineering standard which says don't do these things because these things are potentially dangerous from a security perspective. Likewise, in the embedded safety critical space, there are also standards such as AutoSAR and MISRA C. These are standards, again, typically focused on the reliability of safety-critical software, heavily used within automotive, but also medical devices, functional safety, anything where human life is at risk. Now, the key to these techniques, though, is what we're trying to do is we're trying to prevent defects from being introduced into the software development pipeline. Here, this is really where quality starts. Quality starts when the developer writes the first line of code as they're implementing those requirements. Now, we know from industry research that has been done numerous times over the years that most defects are introduced right during those early stages of software development, but they're identified much later in the process where obviously they cost a lot more. This has actually been true for well over 2 decades, and it really the surprising thing is that the industry is actually not getting much better about this because we're not applying the basic principles around how we can put automated quality into the process. So our goal here by deploying code analysis isn't only to identify, kind of things which makes the code easier to read and easier to maintain, but trying to uncover those defects right when they're introduced so that we can do 2 things. We can first shift left the identification of the defects, and certainly the other testing techniques we'll talk about help us with that as well. But from the point of view of static code analysis, pushing down the number of defects that are introduced in the first place, so reducing the injection rate, not just the detection rate. So here we're focused on how we can prevent as well as detect with the code analysis. Now, once we know that we've got solid code that's been constructed, we can then start performing verification and validating that the functionality does what it's intended to do. So typically, what we see in many organizations is obviously they will define work items inside of VersionOne or TeamForge, and then some organizations will define the acceptance tests at the same time as defining the user stories. Not everybody. This is why I have kind of this little boxes kind of dotted lined around the outside, because it's somewhat optional. It certainly is a best practice that you define your acceptance tests when you define your stories, but you're certainly going to find that your acceptance tests are probably not fully complete and not all-encompassing before you start development. It's human nature that once I know what I want to develop, I want to start developing it, and it often requires a cultural change to really switch to a true test-driven development model. What we normally see is organizations adopt a blended approach where TDD is leveraged in some parts of the organizations for some stories, and then it's augmented with additional testing techniques as the development team are moving forward. We actually have a really good blog that we did kind of middle part of last year around test-driven development, and is one of the things which will be available through the portal link that we'll share with you at the end of today's session. Now, once I've done the work, though, whether or not I've defined the acceptance test, I now need to actually do the test, okay? So I'm going to make a decision here. I'm going to say, am I going to do that testing manually, or am I going to do it automated? Obviously, what you want to do is you want to automate as much as possible, and this is where the concept of the testing pyramid comes in. The testing pyramid is a well-known testing strategy in the Agile community. Martin Fowler, Michael Cohn are 2 big proponents of this. And in essence, what it says is you want to automate as much as possible, and you want to automate more at the unit level than at the API level, and more at the API level than the UI level. And then you want to reserve your very precious and valuable manual testing time for the use cases which truly require manual testing efforts. So we're going to talk through each of the automation strategies here. What we do often see, though, is many people self-identify with an ice cream cone rather than a pyramid. So in essence, they see it as inverted. And this is one of the things that Parasoft helps our clients with, is helping them kind of melt that ice cream cone and get closer to a pyramid organizational structure. And this is what our technologies are designed for. When I'm talking about the testing pyramid, I'm looking at unit tests at the lower level of the pyramid. Then we're talking about API tests moving up, and then UI tests at the top of the test automation. And we'll talk about each of those three quickly now as we go through this deck. So the first thing is around unit tests. Typically what you're looking at here is leveraging open source frameworks where you can. So things like JUnit, Google Test, these things are going to get you going. Certainly when you're talking about an enterprise IT application, such as in banking and healthcare insurance, we're going to be looking at using those open source frameworks, and we're going to be looking at how we can create code that's well structured so that it's more maintainable, more testable, and by embedding unit testing as a practice in that process, it actually builds that good design into the code as well as achieving high numbers of test coverage. When I'm talking about safety critical applications, though, this is where, so automotive, medical devices, industrial automation, functional safety, this is where you need a true certified framework, and this is where Parasoft brings our CC++ test product and its TUV certified testing framework that comes in to help with those industry areas. Now, our goal here is to really identify problems and regressions as early as possible in the process. At the bottom of the testing pyramid, these tests are easier to execute, but they typically require more work from a technical perspective. So they require more technical resources to create the tests and the automation that goes along with this. Now, that being said, obviously Parasoft has technology to help assist with that process, especially when it comes to Java JUnit test cases. Our JTest product has generation functionality that will create JUnit test cases that have no vendor lock in them, so they're fully portable, plugged into your CI/CD pipeline, and then along with the traceability of being able to tie back to the work items that we're going to talk about in a second. As I move up the testing pyramid, I'm now starting to look at the functional test automation. So now that I've got the capabilities up and running, I'm not looking at granular code level transactions. I'm looking more at the interface. Interfaces are both human interfaces and non-human. So that's your web interface versus APIs or headless interfaces that external systems use to communicate between each other. That external interface, the headless interface, this is where our SOA test product comes in with our API testing technology for not only testing of RESTful transactions and web services, but also testing of protocols like Kafka, MQ. And then as I move to the top of the pyramid, this is really where that customer experience is really, really visible. This is your web UI, and Selenium is the industry choice when it comes to web UI automation. So what we do with the technologies is we're able to support that test ecosystem, but then also addressing the challenges associated with Selenium test automation or test automation with Selenium. Here we're addressing the issues of maintainability, of handling changes in the application, and handling the associated script changes that would be required in the test suite. The whole goal here is to streamline the process, reduce the technical burden, and really accelerate the overall testing practice. Now, as I said, this is a pyramid, and it's not a trapezoid, so there's UI testing at the top, but API testing really does represent a sweet spot when it comes to test automation. This is a way where I can create functional test automation with broad levels of coverage from the business function perspective. It's easy to automate, so I can plug it in very streamlined into my CI/CD process, and it's a lot more resilient to changes in the UI because your APIs are typically easier to manage the change in, and it's easier to handle the refactoring of the test suites that is going to be required. I also see API tests as really being a sweet spot from the point of view of reusing those tests to shift left your non-functional testing requirements. So being able to reuse those tests for load and performance, so be able to give you a shift-left performance testing strategy, but also to be able to reuse those API tests as well as the UI tests for early stage penetration testing as well. Being able to take those test suites as input into your testing process and be able to get early stage validation if you've got performance issues or if you've got security issues. This doesn't remove the need for a security team to do analysis of the application, but the whole goal here is, remember what I said before, it's like testing just identifies where the problem is. And if you're identifying the problem late in the cycle, it's going to mean it's going to be systemic and it's going to keep staying there unless you put a feedback loop in place. And the sooner you can get the information, the better you can make that feedback loop. The static analysis that we talked about earlier gives us the ability to help prevent second and subsequent. And by introducing performance testing and security testing here, before we go to our stage environment where the security team are doing their white hat analysis, this gives us the ability to do earlier stage detection. Now, when we shift left these practices, though, we are going to come into a problem, and that problem is access to the test environment itself. This is very evident when folks try doing shift-left performance testing. Here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to push capacity through my application, but my application has dependencies on other external components. And those external components can't handle the capacity that I'm pushing through because I don't have access to a fully performant system. Maybe I don't have access to it because of a time window. Maybe I don't have access to it because it's a shared environment, or maybe it's just frankly not scaled to the level that I need it. This is where the concept of service virtualization comes in, where I can simulate my external dependencies. I can simulate the functional behavior, the performance characteristics, the data that drives those, so that I can truly shift left my tests and make this concept of continuous testing a reality. And then I can leverage that data to really build continuous quality into my process. Now, this is a lot of information. There's a lot of different techniques that we can work with here. All of this data has to go somewhere, though, so I can make sense of it. And this is where we bring everything together into a centralized reporting and analytics dashboard. Here we can combine our code analysis data with our unit testing data, with our code coverage, with our API testing, with our Selenium tests, and bring all of this together into one centralized view of quality, where we can give you a high-level visibility, where the management and the leadership team can get a view as to what's going on within the development process, but where also the leads and the practitioners are able to look and get into the details as well. And this quality hub is what drives the traceability workflow, because we have to remember where we started. Where we started was with the work item. And if I've got all of this data and I'm not correlating it to the work item, I have no visibility as to what the quality of the thing that I am releasing is. So here's where we actually can send that data back to the original system of record. So we can use the data that's aggregated inside of our reporting and analytics dashboard. We can send that data back into VersionOne or TeamForge to show the status of the individual items. And then we can change the status of there so you can see right within your working system. But we can also take back the data and do true bidirectional traceability. So we can actually both push the results into VersionOne, but we can also interrogate VersionOne to understand what we're testing and create you a traceability matrix inside of the reporting and analytics dashboard. So here I've got traceability, but what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if I have a test failure? What happens if I start seeing a lot of code analysis violations? What you don't want to do is you don't want to just start creating defects in your system of record. What you don't want to do is to say, if a test fails, create a defect in VersionOne. The reason you don't want to do that is that test automation can be unstable. What you want to do is you want to be able to triage the test results and make sure that test failures are because there is a defect in the code, and because there's a real problem that somebody needs to work on. And then you need to be able to create the work item rather than if, for example, some backend database got taken offline for an upgrade and all of a sudden now you have 1,000 test failures. So we do that through the use of the reporting analytics dashboard and the ability for a practitioner so a developer or tester to really get into the details, see why a test is failing, look at the data, look at the test, look at the traceability, and say, yes, this is a problem. I want to create a defect or an issue, in essence, an additional work item back in version 1 so that the team can work on that and schedule it. So let's go ahead and actually give you a very brief demonstration of how this works. So let me go ahead and actually turn on screen share. And then I'm going to say, okay, this is screen share. Okay. Okay, so Eric, can you let me know if you're able to see version 1?
I cannot yet.
Okay, let's just give it a second. I think it's there. Yeah, I think I'm getting confirmation on my side that it's there. Okay, so what you should be seeing now is you should be seeing version 1 interface. You should be able to see my backlog. And you can see that I've got a number of stories, and you can also see that I've got a couple of defects that have been created. I'm actually just going to dig into one of them and give you a very quick overview of that workflow. So if we look at let's go ahead and look at this. Let's go ahead and look at the withdraw and transfer. So again, here I'm directly within version 1. The same workflow is available inside of TForge, which is obviously implemented slightly differently based upon the interface. But here you can see I've got a standard backlog element or a story, depending on how you have your system configured. You'll also see that I have a test status here. And on that test status, you can see that this says there's 1 failure and 11 passed. We can also see that I can jump down to a specific section in the stories that talks through each of those tests. And you can see here, I've got a list of a number of automation tests. I have some which are doing either API tests, which are actually these ones here, Parabank services. These are coming from Parasoft Solar tests. And then you can see I've got a number of Java test classes. These are actually JUnits that are being executed using Parasoft JTests. I could then go ahead and drill into one of these tests again, still within version 1. So here I can see the information for that test, and you can actually see data here really telling me about what that test is. And then you can actually see, if I go down to the links at the bottom, you can actually see that I have a link that takes it back to the Parasoft reporting and analytics dashboard. Now, actually, looks like I just had a slight problem there. So let's just go ahead and just clear that selection. Okay, so what it does is it takes me right back to the reporting and analytics dashboard. That gives me the ability to be able to look at the details of a particular test, not only the details of the test itself. So I'm actually looking at a Java unit test here, and we can see that this one is actually associated with a particular backlog item tagged right here. But I can also see the test history when it was reported, as well as test traces. So if I go ahead and filter now and look back at one which is a failure, I should be able to see my test trace, which is actually giving me the stack trace in this case for a particular assertion, and I can see the details, and then decide if that test failure represents a defect or an issue that needs to be created in my original system. So what we've got here is we've got the ability to be able to look through version 1 and see the data from version 1 through into the reporting and analytics dashboard, but we can go the other direction as well. So if I actually go to the high-level dashboard, this is actually the same data, but looking at the quality data in the quality dashboard, within Parasoft's reporting and analytics dashboard. And you'll see here that I have a number of different data elements. I've got static analysis, testing, which includes both unit and functional testing. I have security results here in the top right. And then in the middle, you can see that I've got VersionOne work items. And I've got two different widgets here, one which is showing me I have 7 work items, another widget that shows me the different status of each of those work items. Let's go ahead and drill into looking at the test matrix. And here I can see my test matrix that I have those 4 primary stories that I was just showing a moment ago in the backlog. I can see tests that are associated with them. I can actually drill down further and look at the details regarding those particular tests. And again, I can actually drill down to the Test Explorer itself and actually look at the that same Explorer view that I was showing you a few moments ago as it relates to a particular test violation or test failure associated with a particular work item in VersionOne. Now, so this gives me a view at a kind of from the point of view of a work item perspective directly inside of VersionOne. I can also then see a high-level overview for a particular project within the Parasoft reporting and analytics dashboard. But now how do I aggregate that up across multiple teams as I'm looking at scaling Agile and scaling the value stream? And this is where the last piece of the puzzle comes in. So here we're able to integrate in with the continuum component of VersionOne, where I have a progression board for different components within my delivery pipeline. So in essence, different teams that are working to the same delivery. And we have this, what's referred to as the quality corner within CollabNet VersionOne's continuum platform. This quality corner in the bottom left of the different tiles gives me the ability to see if there are rogue commits as per the source control system, but it also lets me jump directly to look at different violations or static analysis violations or test failures, or even look at code coverage as it relates to the data that's in the dashboarding. So if I was to click on one of these, it would actually jump straight to the Parasoft reporting and analytics dashboard, where I can actually navigate. In this particular case, I'm navigating code coverage information and looking at the detail of the code. But I can also navigate to the high-level dashboard that relates to that project as well. So I can just click on that and it takes me right to that same dashboard that we were looking at a moment ago. So that kind of brings the full process into bear. So really kind of returning to the slides, we're able to have that full bidirectional traceability work item creation. And then that last component that we were just looking at was how do I elevate this data and elevate it to the value stream as a whole. And the use of the quality corner is the key component that really enables that. So I think Eric is probably, we're right towards the end here. So if folks have additional questions, I see a couple that have already come in.
Yep.
If folks have additional questions, now's a good time. As Eric was talking about, the value stream really kind of comes together through the use of kind of following a very similar V model, and this integration between Parasoft's test automation technology and code analysis is what is the bridge or the glue that ensures that you've got quality deliverables moving through that process. Before we switch to questions, Eric, is there anything else that you think we need to touch upon today, or do you think we covered it all?
I think you did a great job there, Mark. So essentially, just as a highlight, we wanted to make sure that when we're scaling our Agile and DevOps holistically, we're talking about that end-to-end value stream from that concept to cash, and really focusing on building that culture of continuous delivery across the entire organization, right? That entails building a continuous delivery pipeline that directly enables business outcomes and really brings in the customer aspects into that. So the quality and security as part of that value stream is critical and paramount for being able to deliver value, continuous value to your customers.
Great. So I think maybe we should switch to questions. And then obviously we have a portal landing page as well on the CollabNet site, and this is where we'll be adding additional content as well. There's already a number of things already there. But did you want to go through the questions? Or?
Sure. We got so the first question is, are there any recommended code analysis tools to include in a CI pipeline? How does static code analysis differ from linting tools?
Great question. So yes. Parasoft provides technology for Java, C++, and .NET. The difference between, so that would be our Parasoft C++ test, Parasoft JTest, and Parasoft .test. The difference between code analysis and linting is really the depth of analysis and the quality of the results that you find. Linting really does cover a good basic foundation, so it can do a lot of things like basic patterns within the code base. When you're talking about code analysis, though, you want to go much deeper, and one of the techniques is referred to as code flow or data flow analysis, and this is one of the key elements that you need to be able to ensure that your code is both secure and reliable. So if I kind of think about the difference between the two, there's a lot of open source linters out there. Certainly for the JavaScript languages, Python, Go, things like this. There's a lot of there are linters available for that, as well as Java and C++. So it's a great place to start. But what I'll say is that the depth of analysis and the ongoing value that you get from those linters isn't as high. So that's kind of the key difference for me is the depth of analysis and the value of the results that you produce out of it.
Great. Next question, Mark, is how do I integrate Selenium tests into the workflow?
Okay, good. Another good question. So Selenium is actually, obviously, it's as you're already familiar because you asked the question. So it is the number one platform or the number one framework that organizations use for doing web UI automation. It is a code level framework, and most popular being Java. So what we actually do within the Parasoft ecosystem, we have a product called Parasoft Selenic. Parasoft Selenic gives me the ability to inject things like self-healing and AI recommendations, as well as assist with the creation of the tests. But the key piece when it comes to integration into this workflow is the traceability component. So we actually have Java annotations that are available that you can inject into your Selenium tests, and we actually do create those automatically as part of our creation workflows, but you can inject those as part of your existing Java code very easily. It's an open source annotation framework. And then what that annotation does is actually gives our reporting and analytics dashboard the traceability hook that it needs. So then that workflow just works the same. So we've actually got a few different ways of attaching a test to a requirement or a user story or a particular test artifact, but they all use the same kind of nomenclature. For Selenium, it would be a Java annotation.
Excellent. The next one here is, can I associate tests with multiple stories in our test?
You can. That's not an uncommon scenario. Typically speaking, when you're moving higher up the testing pyramid, so as I'm starting to create functional tests, you'll probably notice that your functional test crosses more than one use case. In that case, it might be associated with more than one requirement or more than one test. So yes, this is fully supported. What will happen is, depends on what the artifact is that you created inside of VersionOne. If you've created a user story requirement and you're attaching to multiple of those, we will create a test artifact for you, an acceptance test automatically in VersionOne, associate that test results to that, and then that test will be associated to multiple requirements. Conversely, if I'd actually had, if I've been attaching to multiple tests, then test results are sent to those multiple test artifacts that you'd created as part of your kind of standard workflow process.
Yes, we got another one just came in. Do you think I could perform both manual and automation tests using version 1 and what you just demoed?
Well, the short answer to that question is yes. Within version 1, we can document or we can define an acceptance test. And then what I would recommend you do is you categorize what type of that acceptance test is. So, you categorize whether or not it's manual or it's automated. The workflow that I talked about is obviously heavily focused on test automation. So we're talking about how we can automate the results and send them back into that. But certainly from the point of view of documenting and defining the tests, from my perspective, it's the same. Obviously, I'm not a version 1 expert, but I'll give you that as my answer. I don't know, Eric, if you wanted to expand upon that, or if you think that's, or if I kind of touched it correctly.
You did. You're a certified expert now. I want be cognizant of time, so I want to try to get this one in as well. I'm in the automotive industry adopting Agile. Can you comment on how to create certified software when using Agile development practices?
Yeah, sure. So actually, this is one of the things which is really unique about Parasoft is we work with not only enterprise IT clients like the major banks, but also automotive clients as well as I mentioned, medical devices, etc. We do see this as a common trend. So our clients in the safety critical space are adopting Agile and have been doing for a number of years, but they're still somewhat struggling. And a lot of that is because of kind of the kind of self-forming theme, self-decision-making process that Agile brings to the table, which it promotes a lot of flexibility. But it also gives you an absolute nightmare when you're talking about building safety-critical compliance software. So I'm not surprised by this question. In fact, I was literally in Germany 2 weeks ago talking about exactly this challenge with the team whose job it is to make sure the product is their code is certified. They have the development teams, in essence, using technology which is not certified for use in safety critical. So the way that you do it is you're actually very Agile does work with traditional safety critical practices, but what you have to do is you have to make sure that the process is defined, and more importantly, it's the process, the methodology, and the tool chain. And obviously that's the piece where Parasoft comes in. It's very much on the tool chain, but we also have worked with clients kind of, in essence, sanity checking their methodology too. If you can standardize that and document it, then you can achieve compliance. The key thing is to put these practices in place that we've talked about today, which are often viewed as somewhat optional in a very dynamic Agile environment. But when you're talking about safety critical, these things are no longer optional. And this traceability component that we talk about today is a key element, especially, I think you said the person said they were in the automotive industry.
Yeah.
So ISO 26262 compliance requires test traceability, which is this workflow that we're talking about. But this workflow that we're talking about, we do see as a challenge in our enterprise IT clients because they don't know the quality of the thing that they've just developed and the impact of that on the things they've already developed. So the idea of getting a true view of test coverage.
Yes, and speaking of that, they're talking about, someone asked about core coverage, how much testing is enough. You want to comment on that very quickly? We've got about a minute left.
Yeah. Okay. So very quickly, how much is enough? That's a good question. So many people will use the metric of code coverage, which basically means how much of my code was exercised through the use of my testing practices. I have often said that code coverage is a number. It's not the number. So code coverage tells you how much of the code you exercise, but it doesn't tell you how much of your functionality was exercised. That's where really the traceability piece that comes in. And we actually have some reports that will show you how many of your tests, how many of your use cases that you're allocating to this project were actually tested. So you have this other concept of test coverage. When I'm talking to people about how much testing is enough, there's kind of three parts to it. If you're thinking about code coverage itself, just the underlying code, to be honest, it's somewhere between 60 and 80%, depending on how much business risk you're willing to take. Most people above 80% is you get a law of diminishing returns, but below 60%, just you're not doing enough. And it's not necessarily that you're not doing enough, you just don't know what you're doing. So we can actually capture code coverage, not just from automated tests, but also from manual testing practices as well, to give you that view so you know what you're actually doing.
Perfect.
The second piece will be around test coverage. So your requirements, I would say that you need to have 100% test coverage of your business critical requirements. So you need to look at what requirements or user stories you have defined, and they all need to be tested, non-negotiable. And you track that through the use of things like test automation, test matrices that we're talking about here today. And then I had a third point, but I've completely forgotten what it was, so it can't have been that important.
I apologize, but we're out of time, Mark. And for any questions that we didn't get to, we will go ahead and post the answers and when we send out the slides and the PDU credit information. But Mark, thank you so much for this very informational webinar, and timely, I should say as well. Thank you again for
Great. Thank you, Eric.
being here. Really enjoyed it. And audience, thank you as well for attending this, and we look forward to providing you more informative webinars in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody.